everybody, Miss Limer again. We are going to talk about rounding in this video. Rounding was one of the topics that we kind of struggled with, and then we got really good at it. So we're just going to review it. Please make sure that this is something that you're super careful with. So here's our anchor chart for rounding. We can round to the nearest 10 or the nearest 100. You can also round to the nearest 1,000 or 10,000, but we're going to worry about that later. For now, we're just going to practice the nearest 10 and the nearest 100. So when you're rounding to the nearest 10, you always use your benchmark tens, which is basically just counting by tens. So we've got 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100, right? In between that, it's counting by fives. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So those halfways always have a 5 in the ones place. Or you can round to the nearest 100. And you're going to use your benchmark hundreds, which is 0, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. 1,000 is a benchmark 100. That would be a number you use for like 998 or 987. When you're rounding to the nearest 100, that would round to 1,000. So when we're rounding, there's going to be 4 steps. Step 1, you find out what 2 numbers or what 2 benchmarks is your number between. That's step 1. And you're going to put those on your either end of your number line. Step 2 is find halfway. Halfway is the number exactly in the middle of those 2 benchmark numbers. Now remember, halfway always has a 5. When you're rounding to the nearest 10, your 5 is in your ones place. When you're rounding to the nearest 100, that 5 is in the tens place. Step 3, you're going to plot the number, and that's where we put our finger out and we put a dot for that number. So it looks like this. You have your 2 benchmarks, your halfway, and then you plot the number. We label that number on top. And then number 4 is you ask yourself, is it more than halfway or less than halfway, right? If it's more than halfway, you're going to round up. And if it's less than halfway, you're going to round down. Okay, so we've got our number here. If it's plotted, this is less than halfway, so it rounds down to that smaller number. So I made some examples for us to look at. My first example is the number 74, and it doesn't tell us what to round to. And we know that when it doesn't tell us what to round to, we assume that it wants us to round to the nearest 10. So our number is 74. So I look at 74 and I think to myself, out of all of those benchmark 10s, what 2 10s is 74 between? 70 and 80. So those are the 2 numbers that I put on either side of my number line, 70 and 80. After I find my benchmarks, I find halfway. So I put a mark on halfway and I ask myself, what's halfway between 70 and 80? Since we're counting by 10s, we can do that 5s. 70, 75, 80. Now, if you try to label this 85, listen to this. 70, 85, 80. Does that make sense? No, so you have to be careful. Your halfway is always going to take that digit from the first benchmark number. After you find your halfway, you plot your number. So I've plotted my number, 74, and I know that 74 is less than 75. So then I ask myself, is it more than halfway or less than halfway? And 74 is less than halfway, so it rounds down to 70. Here's another example. 4,682, and I want it rounded to the nearest 10. So I underline my 10s in my ones place. And remember, guys, you can just cover that thousands and hundreds place, and you can ask yourself, what 2 10s is 82 between? Well, 82 is between 80 and 90. So I put my 80 and my 90. And then, guys, I just add the 4,600 to the front. So now I've got it's between 4,680 and 4,690. Again, I mark my halfway. So I'm asking myself, what is halfway between 80 and 90? Well, 85 is. So I put my 85 and then add back on my 4,600. After that, I'm going to plot my number. So I plotted my number and I put it here because I know that 82 is less than 85. So I put it right about here. Really, it doesn't matter where you put it as long as it's on the correct side. Now I ask myself, is it more than halfway or less than halfway? and it's less than halfway. So it rounds down to 4,680. And for my last example, rounding to the nearest hundred, for some reason we always struggle with this one, but it's really no different. So I took the same number, 4,682, and I'm gonna round it to the 100. So I underlined my hundreds, my tens, and my ones place. So put an underline under. Then I find my benchmarks. So my benchmark hundreds, so I start with 600. So I put my 600. What's the next 100? 700. And then I just add back on my 4,000. 4,682 is between 4,600 and 4,700. After I mark my benchmarks, I find my halfway. So I ask myself, well, what's halfway between 600 and 700? 650, right? And then I add back on that 4,000. After that, I'm going to plot my number. So I know that 685 or 82 is more than 650. So I put on the more than side. And then I ask myself, is it more than halfway or less than halfway? Well, it's more than halfway. So we're going to round up to 4,700.